1MDB has sparked embezzlement and money laundering investigations across
one of the
at least
biggest
10
corruption
countries.
scandals the world has ever seen.
What may be the biggest financial scam in history.
A number of corrupt 1MDB officials treated this public trust as a personal bank account.
Follow us as we bring you into the courtroom where the biggest financial scandal in Malaysian history is being heard. By the Malaysian Insight, this is the Najib Razak 1MDB trial, and I'm Patrick Teo. Najib was back in court this morning after pulling a no-show yesterday. We'll tell you more about that in a bit. Today, the court heard about another non-appearance, how a joint venture was birthed out of Najib's personal relationship with Saudi royalty, which led to 1MDB having to scramble and skipping out on carrying due diligence to get the JV signed in time for a Saudi prince's royal visit. But the prince never showed up. Yesterday, Najib's lawyer Shafi Abdullah had told the judge that his client, who is still a member of parliament, would not be able to make it to court because his speaking slot in parliament had been delayed. Visibly annoyed, Judge Colin Sakera pointed out that he had agreed to a later start in yesterday's proceedings because Najib had promised that he would be done in parliament by lunchtime. But the judge eventually conceded, but not before giving a stern warning that this was the last time he would allow something like this. Proceedings this morning started on track with Najib in the accused dock. Shafi first spent a few minutes rehashing yesterday's occurrence and then went straight into his cross-examination of witness Shahrul Haumi, the former CEO of 1MDB. It is his third week on the stand. The lawyer brought up the suspension of Islamic bonds for the Terengganu Investment Authority, or TIA. Now, if you recall, when TIA was formed, it needed to raise funds, and it chose to do so by issuing Islamic bonds worth 5 billion ringgit. For this purpose, AM Investment Bank was hired as lead arranger. But before the bonds could be issued, the Sultan of Terengganu, who had initially backed TIA, took issue with the terms of issuance and ordered for it to be suspended. We have heard from Shahrul's prepared testimony about how Najib had told the witness to go ahead with the issuance in spite of the Sultan's orders and that he would speak to the ruler himself. Eventually, the state of Terengganu backed out of the TIA deal and the state fund became federalized and renamed 1MDB, a name now synonymous with the biggest financial scandal in Malaysia and perhaps the world. Today, Shahrul gave us more details on how that went down. You see, after the Sultan gave his orders, the state of Terengganu issued a shareholders' resolution supporting this, the suspension of the bonds. That same day, Shahrul and a fellow TIA director issued a director's circular resolution, which, the witness said, superseded all other resolutions. Basically, a trump card to override the Sultan's orders. Next, Shafi brought up the joint venture between 1MDB and Petro-Saudi Holdings Cayman Limited. He referred to a letter signed by Petro-Saudi International Limited CEO Tarek Obaid. Now, Petro-Saudi Holdings is a shell company that masqueraded as the real entity Petro-Saudi International. It's a little confusing because of the similarity in name, which we now know is true to Joe Low's modus operandi when it comes to naming shell companies. Petro-Saudi Holdings had agreed to pour in $2 billion in assets, while 1MDB was to put in $1 billion in capital. In the letter, Petro-Saudi Holdings offered to undervalue their 2 billion ringgit portion at 1.5 billion ringgit, so that the 500 million ringgit difference could go into increasing 1MDB's share. Shafi suggested that Petro-Saudi Holdings was being generous in order to impress Najib. Shahrul agreed. The JV was set up to support the long-term economic development in Malaysia. As soon as the JV was signed, Petro-Saudi Holdings began to insist that 1MDB cough up its share, which meant transferring and utilizing the money it had agreed to pour in. This money was part of the 5 billion ringgit it had raised by issuing Islamic bonds. In pushing for this, PetroSaudi Holdings said in a letter that it needed the money to, quote, capture prized assets at attractive valuations considering the global economic climate, unquote. What were these prized assets? Shafi asked the witness. Shahrul said he didn't know. But as CEO, were you not concerned that the company's money was utilized for a good purpose? The lawyer inquired. Shahrul said that he had assumed it was for a good purpose because it was a government-to-government strategic collaboration. He had assumed that governments won't cheat. Shahrul said Joe Low had told him that the JV was set up through the personal relationship Najib had with the then Saudi ruler, King Abdullah. How would Joe know this? Shafi asked. Apparently, Joe had gone along on a yacht holiday with Najib, his family, and Prince Turki, the co-founder of PetroSaudi International Limited in the south of France. Joe told him that it was on this yacht holiday that the JV was first discussed. Shahrul testified that there was a mad rush to prepare the paperwork in time for the signing of the joint venture, so much so that 1MDB decided to compromise on carrying out due diligence over the deal. There was due diligence, Shahrul said, just done orally and never documented. That would be the first in history, Shafi commented with a hint of sarcasm. The witness explained that they had to hurry because the Saudi Crown Prince was already scheduled to make a visit to Malaysia to witness the signing ceremony. But the Crown Prince never did turn up and the signing ceremony never happened. In the end, the JV agreement was signed between Shahrul and Tarek Obaid, the CEOs of both companies, without pomp or pageantry. The witness said it wasn't until after the scandal had hit the headlines that he thought it was weird that Najib and his Saudi counterpart did not sign the agreement. Shafi continued to press on the fact that 1MDB did not carry out formal and documented due diligence on PetroSaudi Holdings before the deal was struck. Some of 1MDB's directors, among them former chairman Baki Saleh, had voiced concern that PetroSaudi Holdings was only injecting assets and not cash. But Shahrul conveyed words from Joe Low and Joe's associate Casey Tang that it was a good deal because PetroSaudi Holdings' asset valuation was higher than its acquisition price. Remember how Najib had called Baki via Joe's phone? Shahrul said that after Baki's conversation with the former PM, he told the board that the JV was something significant. After this, the board asked fewer questions. Now, Shahrul had believed that PetroSaudi Holdings belonged to the Saudi royal family because of the yacht meeting between Najib and Prince Turki, and also because Casey had told him so. Casey had presented a paper to the board. The paper stated that PetroSaudi Holdings had also entered government-to-government agreements with other countries like Argentina and Turkmenistan. Did you verify this with those countries? Shafi asked the witness. Shahrul said no. No one at 1MDB did. No one verified PetroSaudi Holdings' track record either. They just took Casey's word for it. Casey was 1MDB's Director of Investments and Finance, and Joe had asked Shahrul to put him in charge of the 1MDB PetroSaudi deal. Shahrul said he trusted Casey and had relied on him for advice because of his legal background. Just like a number of others who were involved in 1MDB, Casey fled the country after news of the scandal broke and has disappeared into the wind. Shahrul said Joe was like the conductor of an orchestra, where each player did not know what the other is doing, with the end goal to produce a certain outcome. He himself was one of those players, he admitted. Is there any possibility that Najib did not know what Joe was doing either? Shafi asked. Shahrul answered, there's definitely that possibility. The witness will be back tomorrow for more cross-examination. This podcast was brought to you by the Malaysian Insight. The team behind the Najib Razak 1MDB podcast are Revati Supramaniam, Yap Pek Kwan and Yvonne Lim. Beat Hong provided additional reporting. And I'm Patrick Teo.